All right, so last week we started a 2-week chapter on faith and science. And the question we asked last week is, are faith and science in conflict? Right? We spoke a little bit about that. And then we read a bunch of quotes that helped us process the idea. And I think that was really, really. So now we're going to approach the topic a little differently, and I'm going to go back to some of the points. I'm going to make a lot of points tonight, so be ready to use your pen. All right, so what did we say so far? We said that faith and science are not in conflict unless one of the two, or both actually, get things wrong, right? So when faith becomes fideism, remember that? That's a problem. And when science becomes scientism, that is also a problem. But faith and science are not in conflict, and we are going to show why tonight. Okay? So faith becomes fideism when I actually think that faith is, I don't need any arguments, I don't need any reasoning, I don't need any proof, I just blindly believe, right? So when faith becomes fideism, then it's blind faith. And when science becomes scientism, it is blind rationalism. Right? We got that. We spoke about that last week. So this is not new material. Yes. It is. Your iPad is very smart. Oh, it's apologetics. Yes. So faith and scientism, or science and fideism, or fideism and scientism are in conflict all the time. But a biblical understanding of faith and a clear and rational understanding of science then puts them side to side because they are not investigating in the same realms, right? Remember what we said last week? You have this material world over here. Yes. Material world and immaterial world over here. And science has something to say about this world. Faith has something to say about both worlds, right? It's not that faith has nothing to say about materialism, about this world. Faith has a lot to say about this world, right? But science has nothing to say. And we'll read something tonight. We'll talk about things that will make that even clearer, right? So we also said last week that because we studied, you remember we studied epistemology together, that science is not the only way to know. And when you make that assumption as a scientist, then you're making a wrong assumption, and that is exactly why we have to be careful. We touched on one principle that we're going to look at a little further, is that for science to be possible, it has to presuppose a bunch of things that cannot be proven scientifically. For example, if I believe that science is the only way to know, how would I prove this truth scientifically? How would I do that? Since science is the only way to know, I have to assume that this sentence itself is a consequence of a scientific process. Is it? It can't. So if I say science is the only way to know, I'm making an unscientific statement. Therefore, science is not the only way to know. You get that? If the sentence science is the only way to know is true, then it is false. And if it is false, it's false. In both cases, it's false. So science is not the only way to know, because science presupposes a bunch of things, and we're going to look at those things right now. For science to be possible, we got to look at things. So science presupposes. What do I mean by presupposes? Anybody can tell me what I mean by that? When I say something, if I do say science presupposes something, what am I saying? Patrick?
And they can find out if it's true or real, even if it's barriers of time involved.
Okay.
But they can't because they can't be everywhere and they can't be like God.
Right. Okay. Very good. Yes. You raise your hand.
Me?
Yeah. No. Yes.
Yeah, it's a foregone conclusion.
Yes. Yes. Another way of saying it's like you presuppose something because you can't prove it. It's just like we have the same idea when we say we presume. I have a presumption. I'm presuming something about you, so I don't know. Like the idea of prejudice is also a form of presumptions, therefore a presupposition, right? I'm making a statement about you even though I don't know you. It's the same thing with this. For science to be possible, it has to presuppose things to be true without being able to prove them to be true, right? So it's funny because we are going to look at this and realize, okay, well, science is laying its foundation as a field that requires things to be true, but that cannot be true if God is not real. That is the beauty of the argument, right? So let's go back to this. So why science presupposes what? That truth exists. That's number one. That is a huge assumption that we're making. And people are going to say, well, I know that truth exists because I can find it. But then you're presupposing that you did find it. But you don't know if you did find it, right? So if science, for science to be true without God, it has to presuppose a bunch of things that cannot be proven scientifically, which means that it defeats the very idea of scientism. If for science to be possible, it requires religious statements, then science is not the only way to know, obviously, right? So it has to presuppose that truth exists, number one. Number two, that the universe can be understood. Right? And people always say, well, my experience shows me the universe can be understood. No, you're assuming that you understand the universe, but you can't prove it besides using your own rational thoughts, which itself cannot be proven to be reliable if God is not true. See how, understanding this, I know it's maybe new material and you might just have to wrap your mind around this. But the idea here is really important for us to grasp this concept because science is claiming total objectivity, right? Like, there's nothing more objective than science. Science is a process. What do? We go to the lab, we get things over here, we test them over and over and over and over again, and when we get the results, it's proven to be true or it's proven to be false. Very simple. For example, when scientists use their mind power to realize there has to be something existing that we haven't found yet, some things years later actually are found to be true. Like you heard about the Higgs boson. You know what that is, if you know a little bit of physics. So it's a small particle that could only be proven to be there when the collider was built in Europe collided protons and atoms at such speed that it will explode and create the smaller parts that are actually inside. But Higgs is the name of the scientist that predicted that there has to be something smaller, and it would be this, and he was proven to be true. So years before we were able to actually prove the existence of that boson, he predicted that it was needed, just like Einstein predicted some things that we would find depending on like the light of speed, for example, would have to be constant, and that's something that would change. Right? All these things were predicted, and they were proven to be true later on. So the point here is science is presupposing things in order to be able to function. And one of the things that it presupposes is that the universe can be understood, that we look around us and we can understand things around. Number three. Like our reasoning capacities is reliable. Like like our reasoning capacities are reliable. So we are going to spend a lot of time discussing this later in the semester because this will be one of the offensive approach to apologetics that shows that if God does not exist, then our brain hasn't been designed to think. Therefore, we can accept it. We can accept blindly that our brains are reliable because it hasn't been made to think. So that's another assumption we're making, that reason is reliable. The other thing that science is making as an assumption is that understanding the world is beneficial. How's that? Some people might say, well, yeah, look at medicine. Medicine developed, in science, and then it's beneficial for us. Yes, but you're assuming that life is valuable also. Right? It's beneficial because you're presupposing that lives have to be saved. But on a clearly evolutionary model, there is no way that we would consider man and women's lives as valuable. We wouldn't. Because if there is, let's forget this example, but the idea like there's 8 billion people on the earth. If everybody who has cancer die of cancer, are we going to be extinct? No. If everybody who dies of every diseases that have been cured by medicines, are we going to be extinct? No. We're not going to be extinct. The point is, we value human life despite the fact that this is not an evolutionary necessity. So we value human life, so we find our science being beneficial, but we don't have any reason to think this way. If evolution is true, then none of our lives are worthy to be saved. Because we are not 1 in a million, we're 1 in 8 billion. In the sense, we're nothing. Not that we are in the positive way, you're 1 in a million. No, we're just 1 in 8 billions. We're nothing. We're a drop in the bucket. We mean nothing, and none of us would have any value. But we think that understanding the world is beneficial, and it's not at all. Unless you believe that human lives are valuable, which you can't believe if you actually believe in evolution. So one thing we will say later on, which is a problem for evolution and problem with materialism as believing that God does not exist, it's clearly the idea that no one on this planet lives according to the evolutionary philosophy. No one does. Everybody who commits suicide, it's because they don't find value in their own life. But then, if we find that we don't have any value, it's because we think that we should find it and we don't. That's the idea, right? So, you see how, in a way, it's simple, but it's complex at the same time, because all these things are appealing to Christian axioms and concepts that they are rejecting, but they are needed for anything without God to make any sense in this world. So there's many things that we can look at in our society that shouldn't be there because the evolutionary science and philosophy tells us that they're contrary to what we believe. For example, do you know that automatically, if evolution is true, evolutionary philosophers will tell you that free will does not exist? Because we are just like any other species, we are pre-programmed to act a certain way. So, if it's true, then why do we have a judicial system? Why do we have Victor of him being a deputy sheriff in the city? We shouldn't. We shouldn't have any police. We shouldn't have because people will be people. Just like, do we arrest a lion because he ate 2 antelopes today?
He needs a job.
Well, I know, but the point is, right? Do we arrest lions when they eat 2 antelopes in one day? We don't. Nobody cares. Oh, look at this. Nature is horrible. It's nature. It's brutal. Yeah. And do we realize that in nature, species eat other species alive, right? This is what the world should be if we were all. But all of a sudden, we think we're nothing but the animals that evolved. But then we think of ourselves as having value, but we shouldn't in this way. We're just a bunch of accidents, and none of us make any difference in this world. So when you look at what happens in the world, what the world is actually showing is that we are not made for an evolutionary philosophy. We are made for a biblical worldview. And we'll go into that later on. But of course, I'm stepping into in the future right now. I shouldn't. Okay, so so understanding the universe is beneficial, of course, right? And we also believe that this is good. Believe that, but then we have to believe that good does exist. How do we know that? If there is no objective reality, then there is no good and evil. As simple as that. Right? Next week we will. Is it next week? We'll watch the video. Yes. Next week we'll watch a video. It's interesting, and Jesse will summarize the video for us, and then we'll have a conversation about it. But you'll see so interesting how. So it's a guy who goes on a campus. I think it's University of California in Berkeley, and he asks students and professors who are studying science if they can give him one example of change of kind that would prove evolutionary theory to be true. Well, nobody is able to provide one. But he goes further into the questions. It's very fascinating. And what's amazing about that is you realize that what people think that science is completely objective, completely, empirical. It's not true at all. So it's going to be really good. The other thing we learn a little bit is that science is not entirely objective, right? You remember that quote by Richard Wanton? We don't want a divine foot in the door. So that's what it is. Divine foot in the door. Remember that quote? Okay. Yeah, we don't want, we have to stick with the plan, because if we don't, then we're going to have a divine foot in the door, and nobody wants that. Now, so I said, earlier that science presupposes some of the things to be true. But even further than that, science resides on presuppositions that cannot be proven. So it's one thing to presuppose things, it's another thing to actually base your whole process in things that cannot be proven. And there's many things that cannot be proven that are accepted by completely blind faith, because otherwise no knowledge is possible. The first thing is mathematical truth. Do you know that we just accept mathematical truth? We cannot prove them. They are there. We can count, we can calculate, but they are there. What's amazing about this, when people find equations, they're expressing truth that is already there. It's not like we can prove mathematical truth. We use them to describe the world, but we cannot prove them to be true. Just, in a way, it works, but they're there, right? Just like the laws of nature, we can describe gravity, but it's there, right? It's not something that it can be observed, just like the wind can be observed, but it cannot be proven, right? So we have to accept, for science to be possible, we have to accept mathematical truths without being able to prove them at all. They can only be presupposed, because proving math would be arguing in circles. Just like proving that my brain is reliable by showing it to you that it's reliable by using my brain. But I don't know if it's reliable because I'm trying to reason my brain into being reliable, but I can't prove that either. Okay? So,
proving math is right now. Proving math is...
well, if I were to prove mathematical truth, I would be arguing in circles.
Okay, thank you.
Right?
Okay.
I guess there? Good. So there is a philosopher, his name is William Lane Craig. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's a Christian. And he said a few things. He's the one that I got the least by listening to one of his videos one day. He said there's a few things that we have to accept that can be proven and then that are very interesting. Number one is logic and mathematical truth. We cannot prove those, right? Number two, logic and mathematical truth. The other thing is that there are out there other minds other than mine. There are other minds other than mine. Like, honestly, how can I know that you're here? Can I prove to you scientifically that you're here? Well, if you were to answer yes, couldn't this be my imagination? Maybe there's only one mind in the world, and it's mine. Well, we're interacting, yes. Which one, the second one? There are other minds outside of mine. Like I have a mind, you have minds, but I'm presupposing that you're there. But I can, yes, sir.
What about using the senses of a person? For example, like in proving that the existence of someone is present or not, you use your senses as touching, seeing.
I would have to trust my senses.
Which direct to your mind.
Which is connected to my brain. So I would have to trust my brain is capable of understanding the senses. So you see how if there is no objective truth, if there is no God, then all these things have to be assumed. They have to be presupposed. There's no way I can prove them. So another example he gave is that I have to assume and presuppose that this world was not created 5 minutes ago with the appearance of age. I cannot know that for sure. Right? Can you prove to me that this universe was not created 5 minutes ago and we have what we think is our past, but our past doesn't exist? All these metaphysical truths are assumed to be true, but they cannot be proven. So there's many things that is outside the realm of science that makes science not the only way to know. Right? Ethical values. What we believe to be right and wrong. These cannot be tested by science. Because science actually has done many unethical truths. Any unethical things in the past. Right? I mean, I'm sure I don't know if some of you studied the history of science, but we used people to test things. And particularly people that were, well, no, they were, okay, dead people, okay, I think, well, you can give your body to science. But alive people that were actually considered lesser people that were used to develop science. Right? Some of the discoveries we made in the 20th century were actually based on research that were done in the Nazi camps in Germany. So they were using some of the treatments on Jews, and if it worked, well, they worked. If it didn't work, they died. I mean, I don't want to say other things because I'm entering into something else. But if you look at the history, even in America, it's the same thing. You know, it's so interesting. So the point being is that ethical values cannot be proven scientifically. They are there, and then we break them or we don't. Right? Think about aesthetic judgment also. Anything like art and beauty and all these aesthetic judgments we have, these are not scientifically proven either. They are what they are. We like things, we find them beautiful, and other things we don't. But the very idea that aesthetic judgments are a thing is also something that has zero evolutionary advantage. What would be the purpose of evolution to equip us with the need to build museums? What are we gaining? How many sunsets have we seen? Thousands? If I tell you tomorrow, let's go, I know a place we can see beautiful sunsets, and you're free, would you think you'll come? Of course you will. But we've seen so many of them. Why are we fascinated by the beauty of nature, in that way? There's absolutely zero evolutionary advantage of looking at the world out there and liking it. Art, beauty, sculpture, colors, all these things, they are completely, number one, useless for evolution, and they are completely outside of the realm of science. They are a thing of their own, right? So it's outside the realm of science. All these things are completely outside of the realm of science. And as I said earlier, science itself cannot be vindicated scientifically. Yes?
I want to make sure I catch the point about
Yes.
the sunset. You're saying that there's no value in anything. The sunset shouldn't be beautiful to us.
Well, yeah.
There's no aesthetic value.
Well, if you and I were just a product of evolution, what would be the advantage of creating human beings that value beauty outside? Can you survive by being blind at the same time? Yes, we can. So there's no evolutionary advantage of us loving the world around us. Absolutely none. Right? So the point being here is, if we enjoy the world, if there are aesthetic judgments, aesthetic values outside of us that are actually objective in some way, some of them are, and then number one, they are of no advantage when it comes to evolution. And number two, they are completely outside of the realm of science. Therefore, some of those things that become objective to us cannot be proven by science. They're just there. Right? Which means that there are a lot of things that we accept as true that are completely outside of science. And the point we're discussing since last week is, are they in conflict? And the answer is only in conflict if we reject what makes science possible and don't understand that religion and belief in God is what makes science possible. And that's the argument we're going to make later on. Okay? Any other questions or comments on that? Yes, sir.
How can you study judgment for study?
Which one? Aesthetic? Yes, I can. Is there an E, a judgment? Yes. Aesthetic. Something beautiful. Yes.
If the for what I presuppose, or I think, like many scientists, they verify this thing too. Like their own science cannot be proved.
Yes.
So they kind of knew maybe in their conscience that there must be something more there. But because of their predisposition to science, they won't have that having food in their door, their
Yes.
acceptance. Do they fall in the category of Romans 1:18, for example?
Yes. Romans 1:18, they know the truth, but they suppress it. Now, let me put it this way. Richard Lewontin is one of a kind. Okay, not every scientist is madly against God and deciding that. Many scientists that I've been talking to, like I told you, in my family, I have a few, and they're just atheists by default. They don't see any reason why. If the world can be explained by science, why would it be explained otherwise? Now, philosophy of science is a new field that has been developed since the 1950s, right? There's this famous philosopher of science called Michael Polanyi. He's from Hungary. And he wrote amazing books. Actually, if you find some of his books, it's a little bit complicated, but he explains... he's specialized in epistemology for science. But then he came out with amazing new theories showing that science in itself is not a field that can hold, right? It has to be based on other things that can be proven. So it's kind of a new idea. Unless you study science and philosophy of science on top of that, you're not aware of these ideas. So I would say a lot of scientists are surprised when you bring up those issues. I think I told you, maybe some of you, of the conversation that I had with someone in my family, my uncle, professor of mathematics, president of university. He's retired now, and him and I, with one of my cousins who's an astrophysicist, we're sitting at the table and talking. It was Christmas dinner, and then we're drinking coffee. And then I asked my cousin, who at the time was finishing his PhD, and asking what he was working on, how it was going. And then I asked him a few questions, And I asked him, and I know where I wanted to go. So I think it was the first year I was studying philosophy of science, and I was fascinated. And I realized maybe they know about it, but none of them know, actually. His sister, my other cousin, who's a biologist, never heard of philosophy of science in that way before. And my uncle was defending the idea that science is the better way to know, even not for him, maybe not the only way. At least he didn't say that, but it's the better way to know, because there's nothing more objective than science. And he explained the process, which is very objective. You have a theory, just like Higgs and his boson, right? You have a theory, and then you're going to wait until you get all what you need to test it, and then if you can test it over and over again, it's proven to be true. And if you get the other results, and of course you have disproven the theory. So he goes on explaining this, and he asked me the question, how can you be more objective than that? And I asked him the questions, which theory do you decide are going to be tested or not? So he looks at me, I don't know what you mean. Well, for example, would you be open to the idea that God is the creator of the universe? I don't believe in God. That's not my question. My question is, would you be open to test the theory? No, I wouldn't. So the process of science is objective, but what you put through the process is decided by presuppositions. So you reject the idea of God at the outset of any experiment, therefore there is no experiment that could be done to prove that God exists. And we go back to what Stuart Chess used to say, for those who believe, no proof is necessary. For those who don't believe, no proof is possible. So they have to reject anything outside of science, not because, and we go back to Richard Lewontin, they are committed to something, a scientific process, and they are telling you there's nothing more objective than that, but there is, which is objective truth, but you don't have it because you decide what can be tested and what can't be tested. So the interaction I had with them was kind of enlightening in a way for them, because they realized, yeah, there is a human aspect to doing science, which they have not realized before. So in a way, it shows that the scientist is not necessarily like Richard Lewontin, trying to disprove the existence of God. You have a few of them that does that, but most people who are in science actually would be interested in having a conversation if we know how to direct the conversation. But I think philosophy of science is the best way to do that. Because you can ask someone, do you realize what you have to think and presuppose before you make that you don't realize? Let me rephrase that. You can ask the question this way: do you know what you have to presuppose for you to think that science is actually reliable? And most people don't. The fact that we can understand the world is something that is completely mind-blowing for Albert Einstein. I'm trying to remember what he said exactly. I think it's something along the line, what is the most amazing to him is that the world can be understood. That is the most amazing thing to him. That is the most miraculous thing, is another scientist put it this way: how can nature, part of nature, which is us, can think nature? How outside do we have to be in our mind to realize, like a baby? A baby don't realize they're not the center of the world, and then they realize that other people around them are people. So in the same way, when we grow as adults, we look around us and we can make that judgment, right? But how is it possible for us that we are capable of using our minds and thinking it's reliable to think the world around us, right? And that is making assumptions that can be proven scientifically. And people might say, yes, because we're doing science, but you don't know that. You have to assume that. You can prove, any attempt we would do without presuming that God exists and that our brains are reliable. Any attempt of us proving that would be reasoning in circle, because we would have to use our brain to prove that our brains are reliable. And that this is not the way to work, okay? All right, so let's carry on. Any other questions or comments so far? I know it's a lot. I know it's late, but we have to do this. We have to do it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so basically your brain, in order for us to say that we can reason things through, would have to be designed by a divine designer instead of some kind of law that just fall together somehow.
Yes, so we will look at a quote by C.S. Lewis in his book Mere Christianity later on in the semester. And basically what he says, it's a famous quote, I'm sure you heard it many times, but he's basically saying that if my brain was not designed to think, I have no way of knowing that it actually is doing the job properly, right? So, and he goes on explaining about the odds of that being possible, So if my brain is not reliable, then that's why he's explaining his process that brought him to Christ. So he's asking the hard question for himself. And one of those was this. Well, if my brain is not reliable to think, it's a byproduct of evolution. It's the side effect. When you take medications, you have the good effect and you have the side effects. Well, our thinking capacities are side effects of evolution. Evolution is developing ways for us to survive, and it gave us by accident a brain that is supposed to help us. But it's a byproduct. It's an accident. It shouldn't be working. It's there. Right? But if it's not designed to think, that I have no reason to believe it's reliable completely. So he said, if it's true, then my arguments against God are not reliable either. So I have no logical reason to believe in atheism or anything at all. So, but if I'm thinking, and I think it's true to me, that I have to make another assumption that my brain is reliable. But for me to think this way, I have to have a good reason to think that. And evolution is not a good reason. Yes, sir.
I was just thinking, as you were saying that, you can go even a step further.
Yes.
And say every single species, all of our bodies
Yes.
is just a byproduct of what, is what you said, a side effect. Because
Yes.
the primordial soup, the bacteria,
Yes.
could already reproduce.
Yes.
And that was the goal. If that's the goal of evolution, it was already there with the bacteria.
Exactly.
So everything we have here is just a byproduct of the...
It's completely useless for survival. Yes, so when we'll talk in a few weeks, we'll talk about Christianism versus evolution, and we'll have a video as the one. And the week after that, we're going to discuss the issues that rise up with evolution. And one of them is so if you look at this history of evolution, you have the mononuclear, living cells that came out of nowhere. That's what the science called biogenesis, which is the appearance of life out of non-life, which is in itself absolutely impossible. But we went through that hurdle all of a sudden, and then so when the first cells arrived on the universe, according to the history of evolution, they were self-sufficient. And they are so self-sufficient and reliable that we still have the same today. So millions of years later, we have the same simple cells, and they are the most adapted to this world. That's why they shut us down for 2 years with the COVID. They are so well adapted that we are not capable of living as normal if they're around. We have to protect ourselves, right? So these are the super life forms. We're just like, we are 200 pounds, maybe less. Some of you are more like somebody like me, but let's say something like that. And I can be killed by something I cannot see. That has been around for billions of years, that hasn't evolved, and is very, very adapted to its environment. What was the purpose of evolution giving more? And the other thing is, we'll argue, if our cognitive capacities, our brains, are so important for us to survive, why are we the only one among millions of species to have it and others don't? Yes?
I wanted to add on something I've
Please.
heard very often, I think, about evolution is that people have started talking about evolution as if it were a person.
Yes, exactly.
And so it reminds me, like, you're treating it as if it were a sort of God. And it always brought me back to, like, the laws of causality. Like,
Yes.
everything that has been causing the cause and the effect, it
Yes.
always goes together. And so it's like you're coming to that conclusion, that presupposition, because you know that something has to exist in order for everything here to exist. And
Yes.
it has to be outside of time, outside of space, and outside of, like, matter. So it, like, brings, like, that conclusion, that assumption to, like, a sort of creator.
Yes, if you study evolution for what it is, you will realize the only way for evolution to be possible, it has to be guided by someone with intelligence. That's the only way it would work. Now, I don't know if you love nature documentaries, but it's interesting, every time you listen to documentaries on and then especially the ones on evolution, I think you should do it just for fun. Just go and on Netflix, whatever. Go and look for a couple like documentaries and put down what Vivian just said. Put down the instances where they have to use words such as evolution gave us this. Evolution saw the need for this. The amount of personhood that you have to give, the attributes of person you have to give to evolution for this to make sense, it's mind-blowing. It's amazing. I did that count one day. I was looking it was a 45 minutes, and I'm thinking, boy, I filled the page with this. Like if you remove anything that includes personality behind it, there is no story to tell. Absolutely none. It's fascinating. Yes, sir.
Yep. You asked that question last week about the documentaries, and I was
Yes.
looking about a documentary about Amazon
Yes.
forest, and it was a famous actor who was narrating it, and he was saying like evolution gave to this bird this
Yes.
capacity, or gave to this animal, or gave to this forest the thing, and they were using the same verses like as a human did that. Evolution
Yes.
did this and did that, and
Yeah.
did give this to us.
Yes. Yeah, evolution is highly intelligent. Because there's one thing, if evolution is true, then there's some of the principles that make evolution possible. One of them is natural selection. Natural selection is a mechanism that removes anything that is useless. So when I hear this the first time, the first time I heard evolution, I was in middle school, and then, later on in high school, I'm thinking, hold on for a second. So you're telling me that natural selection is capable of making hard choices and knowing in advance what part of human beings will be useful or useless. That is the first, for me, epiphany in my mind. When I was not working with the God at the time, I actually was trying to find any excuse I could not to give my life to God, because I didn't want to walk with God. I was 17 years old and thinking, I'm out of this. I was in the church from the age of 13 to 15, and from 15 to almost 18, didn't have anything to do. So I went to school. I was trying to grasp any excuses that I could find so I wouldn't have to think about God, because philosophy, science, everything seems so impossible for me to accept. Because I'm thinking natural selection, the very title itself, right? And not only that, it requires like a highly organized intelligence to decide what you need to keep and what you need to keep. But the funniest thing is that for us to evolve from one form to another one, it requires hundreds of in-between species slowly. Because the eye didn't appear overnight, right? It evolved in thousands and thousands and in hundreds of thousands of years. But if natural selection is so intelligent that decided that we're going to remove the tail to these apes because they don't need it anymore, that's why we have a coccyx, right? But we're going to leave that cornea it's completely useless in the back of the skull for now. But I have a plan for it. So natural selection, who's not a person, is capable of deciding, no, you don't need this. No, don't remove that. I'm going to need this in a few generations. It's like you're giving evolution such high intelligence and capacity to choose what human beings and other species are going to need in the future for them to be equipped. This is mind-blowing in that way. Okay, so we have to take a break because you all look like very tired, but we can't take a break because of Patrick, because he has a question. You can blame him for the. No, they want to blame you. I want to blame you, so I don't have to blame myself.
The God of evolution. So basically, evolution.
Yes, God of evolution is very, very intelligent. All right, so we'll take a 10-minute break. Okay, see you guys. Okay, so thank you. So again, in the next 40 minutes, what we want to do is conclude on this debate between faith and science by answering the question once and for all. Are faith and science in conflict? The answer is no. And we are going further today by saying a few things. Number one is, for science to be possible, not only it cannot be in conflict with faith, but it has to borrow from Christian principles to make any sense. So we're going further than that, right? Remember what we said? You follow me? Oh, you guys are really too tired. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it. You're 3 minutes late. So let's think about this way, right? For most people, this is the 21st century. Why are you still believing in God? Science can explain things away. We don't need the God of the gap. We don't need God anything. We have all the answers. Atheism rules. That's the idea, right? Through science. Now we are saying no, because for science to be possible, it has to rely on principles that cannot be found in science itself, right? So we have to think about things in a way that, for example, we give the example of the brain being reliable, that cannot be explained by science itself and cannot be explained by evolution. So we're going to go a little further now by actually making another statement, and this statement is not only science requires faith or religion to be possible, we're going to argue that science was made possible only through the Christian civilization. Because many people say, there is this idea, who studied history? Right? So the 5th through the 15th century, how do we call it? 5th through the 15th century, what's the name of that period? The Dark Ages, right? What do we call the period just after that? Enlightenment, Renaissance, right? So you have these things. So these titles were given in the late 19th, early 20th century, right? So we look back at history, and we are renaming these periods based on what we think they were today. And the very idea, we're thinking that thank God for the 18th century and the Enlightenment, because we were in the Dark Age, and the church kept us from knowing anything, because the church has always been against science. That is the narrative that we've been sold. Now, I'm going to give you some names and dates now. You will realize that Christianity is the number one reason why science developed for 17th century, right? So, I'm going to give you a lot of data, and just for the fun of it, we're going to see interesting. So, the first one, we go way back. His name was Saint Basil the Great, right? That's a B. So his dates 330 to 379 AD. So we're going way back, right? So Saint Basil, he argued that the laws observed in nature are God's laws, right? He looks at this and says, well, the world we see around, because we always think, though, science is a new thing. Many of things that we know today are based on philosophy from the Greeks, 300 years before Christ, right? Now, except that the Greeks at the time didn't have any experience in ways to develop actual science, so they made assumptions. For example, you have Socrates, Aristotle. And Aristotle was known to make a few statements, and one of them is that there is a fundamentals, like the Earth has elements that you won't find in the universe, and vice versa. So there has absolutely no ways of proving anything. But then when Christianity came, and with these theological backgrounds, saying, well, no, for a second. And he was the first one to make that assumption. He corrected the Greeks by saying that there has to be there has to be a unity in the universe. Therefore, the elements that we find on the earth, we would find them in the universe. For example, Aristotle thought that fire was only in our solar system, on our planet. He'd never realized that the stars were actually fire. Because he thought the basic elements, water, fire, earth, you could find them here, and you couldn't find them anywhere. So St. Basil the Great was saying, well, hold on for a second. If God is true, all the laws in the universe has to be his. And it has to be unified, right? So he's one of the first guys who actually put down the foundation for modern science in the 4th century, right? So, and he also said these laws are not eternal, they are contingent to the universe. They are there because God created the universe. In that way, since they are here and they're contingent, then there is a necessity to try experiments so we can know the truth. So this guy, who is a Christian, is the first one that laid down the foundation for the scientific method. Because he realized, okay, well, the world is out there. We are finite beings. We can understand the world around us because these are God's laws. But we have to make sure we understand them properly, so we have to test other possibilities. Right? So he developed the idea of the scientific method as a Christian. Right? And you go down to, you heard about St. Augustine also. St. Augustine summarized his view very simply. You have 2 books, the Bible and nature. And they have to agree, and they will agree. Right? The point being is that nothing in nature will ever contradict the Bible, and nothing in the Bible will ever contradict nature. So in his way, his statement was, you will find harmony, in the universe. You have to find harmony, right? So all these principles sounds very simple for us, but they were groundbreaking at the time because they were actually saying we can understand the world around us because God created it, right? So this idea. I'm thinking you don't need to give you that many names. Okay, I'm going to go through history a little bit, and we're going to make some points. But the point here, I don't want to overwhelm you with the idea of names and dates and everything. You can find that anywhere you want. Okay, it's just for us to understand in apologetics, having that knowledge is very important because it contradicts the idea that faith and science are in conflict. But not only that, it shows that that science developed only in countries where they had faith. Now, even today, countries that struggle with development are countries that were mostly non-monotheists, but they are either polytheists, animists. So there's a connection there done by historians. You heard about Thomas Aquinas. You heard about him, right? So Mr. Thomas Aquinas. What?
There's a school about him.
Yes. So he was a Catholic philosopher and scientist. He was like the poster child of theology, and he argued that reason is in harmony with faith, right? Reason and faith go together. It's funny because when you look, if you know history a little bit, you will discover very quickly that science is not a 21st century discovery. Science has been around for the longest time. If you go back to the 16th century where modern physics started, you realize that every prominent scientist made discoveries for simple reasons. They had the same assumptions based from St. Basil. The world can be understood. God created my mind. The laws are there, God's laws. Therefore, the world can be actually clearly understood. So, from that point on, Isaac Newton and all the other guys, we'll see that a little later, clearly in their mind, thought that the world can be, is not foreign in a way that it's useless for us to try to understand it. So again, I know the point that I'm trying to make here is simple, right? It says that I will go back to the beginning. Not only science and faith are not in conflict, but science, as we know it, is the result of Christians engaging in discovery based on the very presuppositions that we said earlier that cannot be found outside of God, right? So could Isaac Newton believe that he could understand the world around him? Yes, because he believed in objective truth. He believed that there is such a thing as truth because God is there. He believed that he can actually understand the world. He believed that God created both the world and our minds, so we're able to understand. And yes.
No mind other than ours.
Yes. All these presuppositions that we cannot prove are found. So instead of being in the dark age, as some people suggested, then we actually found amazing discoveries around those times because people were motivated by two things. Number one, yes, we can understand the world. And number two, the more we understand it, the more we'll glorify God. Because nature is amazing, right? That's the idea. So, right? Yes. Thomas Aquinas. We didn't finish about Thomas Aquinas. He argued that faith and reason are in harmony, and he also believed, and that was one of the foundations for modern science, that reason can contribute to a deeper understanding of revelation. Yes, that reason can contribute to a deeper understanding of revelation, which is the world in that way, right? So Thomas Aquinas is credited as being one of the reasons why we have, in at least in Europe and in the Western world, intellectual development. I mean, it's interesting. I read this guy. He's a professor of philosophy of science in a university, and he wrote a very interesting book. But one of the point that he makes is that we think we're the smart ones, and back in the day, the teethless people, having no ideas what life is, dying at 40 years old because they live in dumps. I had no idea what the world around us, and people were dumb and stupid at the time. He said that students in the Middle Age or the Dark Ages, if they were to be living today and argue with the power of their mind with modern students, he says his modern students will lose every single debate, every single time. Because we don't have the mind power to be able to argue with it. If you read any book from the Dark Ages, most people don't understand Thomas Aquinas. He's too complicated. Everybody can understand Immanuel Kant, He's supposed to be the most profound philosopher there is. Once you read Immanuel Kant, well, basically you can summarize his whole life work with a simple sentence. There are two realities, noumenal and phenomenal world. That's it. And they don't coexist. Therefore, religion is needed to understand the noumenal world, and science is needed to understand the phenomenal world. There you go. You have Immanuel Kant in a nutshell. That's all you need. Thomas Aquinas, nobody understands him. He's too complicated. Even today, people don't agree with some of the things he's saying because not everybody understands the depth of his writing. So, no. And Thomas Aquinas is 13th and 14th century. He's not the guy, he's almost 800 years ago. And the guy was a brilliant mind. Think about algebra, all these things that we're going to list later on. They're all there because Christians devoted their life to discovering truth. So, our faith and science in conflict? Not in our understanding. University is a Christian idea. Completely a Christian idea. Now, you have to understand, when universities were created, which is during the Dark Age, by the way, it was a Dark Age idea, 10th and 11th century, were the first universities. More than 1,000 years ago, university was there. A third of most curriculums of any university was science. You didn't go to college for science or psychology or this, that. You went to college, a third of your curriculum was science. You had to learn science. And all these universities were Christian. All of them. It's a Christian concept. The Jesuits? Have you heard about the Jesuits? Until now, they are the most respected priest scientists in the world. Absolutely amazing. And their mission is to be professors in universities, either their own or secular universities, to be witness in the world by showing Christ through science. And most Jesuits are scientists. And I have a friend of mine, he died. He was 30 years older than me. And when I was a student, when I was studying apologetics for my graduate studies, I met him. He was a Catholic priest. He was a Jesuit. He was a professor at the University of Montpellier, which is in southern France. And he was professor of physics. And he devoted his life in proving that the shroud of Turin was true. So his life works. And it's funny because he thought I was intelligent enough to understand his writing. So he would write me a letter because, he was like very simple. So he would teach and he would go back to his monastery and in his cell and wrote me letters with his theories and why he believed. So he would write the formulas that were super complicated. I didn't understand anything. I met him a couple times. We spoke a few times. We became good friends. And he's a Catholic. I'm a Protestant. We didn't care. But I was like, I'm thinking this guy is. So if you go in France, in some countries, if you go to a Jesuit school, it's almost a stamp for you can do anything in your life after that. If you enter the school, you graduate from school, you must be in the top 1% of intelligent people. So the point being is that there is a history of excellence in Christianity from the Middle Age, and that is something that most people don't understand. So I'm going to give you more examples. When barbarians used to invade places, the monks were the only one that tried to keep the remains of ancient civilizations for study. Their most prized possessions were their books. Not their lives, their books. So, and we're talking about the 5th and 6th century on, with all the invasions by different barbarians. So I told you about the Jesuits, the church priest scientists, many of whom were Jesuits. They led. So the Jesuits are leading scientists in the following field. I put them down on my paper. Number one, astronomy, genetics, geomagnetism. Right? Before we know there was a magnetic field on the planet, they were there, right? Meteorology. You know your weather for the week? Thank a Jesuit. Seismology. The study of earthquakes and volcanoes, of course. Solar physics. Understanding the sun. The first groundbreaking discovery were made by Catholic priests, right? And some of those guys became the fathers of those new science fields. They are the founders because they made discoveries, right? So I could give you many names I have in my paper. Gregor Mendel, he's one of the pioneers of genetics. He was a priest. Yes.
So do the Jesuits actually have the shroud? They're the ones that
Well, they believe they do, but I can't say that I've been convinced by my good friend. Yeah, there's a whole book on that. He wrote a book on it, and he's trying to prove it to be true. And the main idea for him was that if you look at the printing, have you seen the Shroud of Turin? There's a face on it, and one of the things he promoted, that was his life work, was when you look at in computer 3D, the projections of the image is actually
negative.
printed. No, it's actually in 3D.
No, it's in 3D, but it's
Yes.
actually a negative of a photo.
Well,
So,
yeah, and he explaining that it was gamma rays, and so he could have explained about the resurrections. Yeah. Still today it's something very interesting actually, because when you look at it, actually, well, there's a science behind it. I don't completely understand, but he was very devoted, very devoted. Anyway, so that's very good. Have you ever heard of Roger Bacon? It's a very beautiful name. Roger Bacon. He was a Franciscan, and he was one of the early advocates of the scientific method based on Saint Basil. Bacon and Basil. I'm hungry. I'm hungry. Bacon and Basil. Georges Lemaitre. I don't know if you heard. He was a Belgian priest. He was the first to propose the Big Bang theory as an explanation of God using it to create the world. So we all say, the Big Bang disproves God. I don't think you got to ask Georges Lemaitre. He will tell you it's not the case.
Remember those names?
No, I'm just giving you the idea. Like if you look those things up, you can go to all kinds of places, even Wikipedia, and you will find some list of things that shows that Christianity and science work together, and science was made possible because of the assumption. Think about this way, right? Do people believe in science today without believing in God? Yes, but they're making assumptions that they don't realize they have to. That's the point. But the reason why those assumptions that were believed at the time because of God, that's what made science possible. So in a way, if you were to draw a picture, this is what you could see. The foundation of science is God. And then here you have all kinds of fields of science that grew over centuries and were made possible. Nowadays, people remove this foundation thinking we can still do this. Yes, you can. But what you don't realize is you need this to be possible. And history shows the reason why we're here is because we had this before. Simple, right? So that's the point we're making here, really, in that way. So far, so good? All right, so I'm thinking about Georges Lemaitre. And there's many other... I don't know if you know of Lavoisier. He's the founder of modern chemistry. He's the one that said, nothing is lost, nothing appears, and everything is transformed. He's the first principle of chemistry. That's why you have molecules getting together. H2O, you have two molecules of hydrogen and one of oxygen. And if you do an electrolyte on it, then you can separate them, and you have two times more hydrogen than you would have oxygen. So he's the one that showed. Then when you separate the molecules of water, what you get is oxygen and hydrogens, but you never lose anything. Nothing is added because nothing comes out of nowhere, and nothing can disappear. He would be transformed into something else, right? So the point he's making, which is the foundation that is still true today, is contrary to the idea of evolution itself. So Lavoisier is one of those guys. I mean, we could list Vesalius and other guys that are foundational in any field of science. The point being is that not only science and faith are not in conflict, but we're arguing that science was developed and is possible today based on assumptions that people who do science today reject. And that's why in the Western world, science developed because people were convinced that their mind was reliable, that the world could be understood, and that they would glorify God by doing it. That's the reality of things. That's not the rewritten history of what happened in the past. That is very important for us to understand. Okay? Do you have any questions on that? Yes, sir.
Yeah, and then the law of entropy, everything wears itself down is totally opposite of evolution.
Yes. Second law of thermodynamics. Yeah.
Entropy, where everything wears
Entropy.
itself
Yes. Yes. Entropy is the principle within the second law of thermodynamics. Do you have any other questions or comments? Ready? So now we're going to add another thing, which is so interesting. The reason why, number one, what do you think is the first thing that people reject when it comes down to faith and science? The first example that people say, besides creation and evolution, what's the one thing that people say this can happen? Miracles. Right. So the first reason that many people think science has disproved Christianity is because faith believes in miracle. So this is an amazing assumption here because people will say, I cannot believe in God or I can believe the Bible because they're miracles. The assumption behind that is that science has already proven that miracles are not possible. And I think this is the heart, for me, evolution is one, Christian evolution, and miracles is the other heart of the issue between faith and science. And people assume, I talk to people who study science, and they are very adamant on the fact, no, science has proven that miracles are not possible. No, it hasn't. It hasn't because science couldn't prove that science the miracles are impossible. It couldn't. So let's talk about that a little bit. So, someone wrote this. I'm going to read it for you. The biblical accounts cannot be reliable because they contain descriptions of miracle. It's very common to say that, I don't believe the Bible because it contains miracles. So the premise behind such a claim is very simple, is that science has proven that there is no such things as miracles. And that is one of the reasons why people see a conflict between faith and science, because people are assuming science has proven that miracles are not possible. Why would you think they say that? Think of other scientists. Why would you think, as an atheist and scientist, that science is capable of proving that miracles are not possible? Why would miracles not be possible, according to an atheist. Yes.
Basically, there's no natural explanation for it. Like what
Yes.
happens.
Right, but that would be the reason why it's impossible. That would be right. So, what do miracles have to do that scientists reject for a miracle to be a miracle? Harold?
Are they in contradiction with the law of the science?
Yes, they're in contradiction with the law of physics. They're in contradiction with the law of nature. Since the laws, which is, for me, this is the most interesting conversation. I won't tell you the whole conversation, but it's so interesting how, so the assumption is that the laws of physics and laws of nature are constant. So they're organized. Right? This is why miracles are not possible. The funniest thing is that miracles are not possible because the laws are constant, but the laws are constant, but God does not exist. So the universe is organized, but God does not exist, therefore there's no miracles. But it's organized. So you see how the circular reasoning is so interesting. And so when you think about this for a moment, for me it's exactly. Is there something up there? But what we're saying is that with the mistake, and we'll talk about that in a moment, the mistake that people make is that you're forgetting one thing. If God did create the universe, he's outside the universe. If he did create the universe, he created the laws of physics and the laws of nature. Can he change the laws of physics and nature as an outside of the universe? Of course he can. So the assumption that miracles are not possible is based on the fact that laws of nature are constant, but that also requires the existence of God. Because if there was no God, there wouldn't be laws of nature or laws of physics at all. So using the laws of physics to prove that there is no miracles is self-defeating argument. Right? There's a leap of faith in that statement, in that way. That I'm saying the universe is perfectly organized, but there is no God, therefore there cannot be any miracles. But the very idea of the miracles are miracles because there are laws of physics and nature. If there was no law of nature and physics, would there be any miracles? There wouldn't be, because they would be random all the time. Somebody gets born and has 3 legs, the other one 2, the other one 4, the other one, how many legs do you have? Oh, nice, okay, well, I wish I had 3, but they're good for you, I know this guy has 1, but it's not easy for him to walk around, but he gets around, and all kinds of different people. This guy has a head behind his back, very useful. I know a bunch of people that has it, never had it, and it's fine. I have one under here, it's kind of useless, but hey, it would be random all the time, but it's not. Everything happens, DNA prevents all these changes as much as DNA can. And so we look at the world perfectly organized, and when things come out of that normal, that's a miracle. But for miracles to be possible, there has to be an exception, right? So for miracles to be possible, there has to be laws of physics and nature. So they don't contradict themselves. They require each other, right? Yes, sir.
Right, so can you just comment on this statement? I haven't heard in a while. I just thought of it. No miracle. Either is no miracles or everything's a miracle.
Yes. Well, that contradicts what I just said, actually, because it's for miracles to be miracles, they have to be exceptional, right?
So either there's no miracles or everything's a miracle.
I would say, no. I would say, everything is a miracle. Yes, in the sense, if you don't believe in God, then everything is a miracle. That's the funniest thing, I think, also. Yeah, because the fact that we're alive, the fact that we can breathe, the fact that we can think, the fact that we can adapt it around the world, this is in itself a miracle. The fact that life came out of non-life is also a miracle. So the universe itself is more of a miracle if God does not exist than anything else, right? That's what's amazing about it. Let's carry on. It's one thing to say that science is only equipped to test for natural causes, which is true. When people say, as a scientist, you have to assume that there has to be a natural explanation for things. I agree with that, right? If I see something out of the ordinary, I'm going to try to find a natural explanation for it. That's completely normal. Even as a Christian, I don't go around and believing people and tell me, this miracle, whatever. I believe in God. I don't believe in miracles spontaneously coming up everywhere, right? So as a Christian, as a scientist, someone might say, well, okay, there has to be a natural cause for this. Not everything is a miracle. Yes, this is the assumption that a scientist should have completely agree with that. What we don't agree is that everything can be explained by natural causes, right? That's the difference. So I'm going to read a little paragraph here, and I'm going to make some comments, right? So it is one thing to say that science is only equipped to test for natural causes and cannot speak to any other others. That's clear. It is quite another thing to insist that science proves that no other causes could possibly exist, right? So the difference is that when you say as scientists there has to be natural causes, agreed. When you're saying there's absolutely no other causes but natural causes, that is not scientifically accurate. Okay? You cannot say that. So Mr. Macquarie, who is an atheist, said science proceeds on the assumption that whatever event occurs in the world can be accounted for in terms of other events. There's a cause and effect, right? When something happens, it's been caused by other natural causes, right? So this is just as immanent as this world. So miracles are irreconcilable with our model understanding of both science and the history. So for him, everything happens in this world, in the closed environment, and there's nothing intervening from the outside, right? So it is true. That's what the author says. Macquarie is right to assert when studying a phenomenon that scientists must always assume there is a natural causes. That's what you're supposed to do as a scientist. There must be natural causes. Let's investigate. That is because natural causes are the only kind each methodology can address. Like if you're a scientist, what kind of causes can you investigate? But natural causes. That's what you do. You're a scientist, you investigate natural causes, nothing else. You cannot investigate any other things. But it is another thing to insist that science has proven that there cannot be another kind of causes. So when you're a scientist, right? You have two worlds, right? You have the material world of you. I'm going to go back to the first one because I already done that, So over here. This is the world can actually be understood by science. Okay, this world is not accessible to science, correct? So when I say, well, I'm going to investigate here to see what causes that miracle, can I use science to do that? Yes, here? Can I use science to investigate the natural cause for a miracle? Yes, of course you can. It's the natural world. Let me give it a try. Somebody has something on their scan, the next day they have nothing. I got to investigate. I need to check the machine, talk to the guy who did it, whatever I need to do. Is it allowed for me to have that investigation? Mm-hmm. Yes. Can I investigate other causes but the ones that are material? I can't, right? You get tired. Right. I cannot go up here and investigate other causes. No. So I should stay over here, correct? Right. But as I stay over here, can I reject that this exists? No. I can't because I cannot make any statement outside of my jurisdiction, right? Because I don't have any authority. So not only I cannot say it comes from elsewhere, but I cannot say that it cannot come from elsewhere because elsewhere is inaccessible for me. That's the point. So when a scientist says, well, like he says over here, miracles is irreconcilable with our modern understanding of both science and history. What he means by that is this world does not exist. And his science has proven that, no, you can't. That's the very idea. If you use a technique or a system that can only investigate matter and energy, then you cannot investigate anything that is not matter and energy. So you have no authority to make a statement, and you would have no scientific method to make any kind of statement. So you cannot say that God does not exist. You can't. It's not your field. So it goes on by saying, okay. So it is another thing to insist that science has proven there can't be any other method. You cannot say that. It's absolutely impossible. There will be no experimental model for testing the statement. And this statement, no supernatural cause for any natural phenomenon is possible. When people say there is no natural causes for natural phenomenon, you cannot prove that scientifically. So a scientist cannot make that statement, and by definition, the scientist cannot reject any other causes but natural causes. You get that? When you make that as a statement, when you use science to disprove miracles, you discredited yourself. Just like a guy who is in medicine, gives an astrophysicist a lesson on planets and black holes. You're not qualified. This is not your field. Like in medicine, actually, a doctor who's not in a specific field will refer to another one without because okay, yes, you're a medical doctor, but I'm not a medical doctor in this field. I have to refer to somebody else who knows better than I do. And it's the same here. And somebody says, well, I know better than I am because I'm a scientist. No, you don't. You know nothing of what's out there that is immaterial. Absolutely nothing. I am the authority in the field. That's what I'm saying. So your statement, your PhDs, your experiments have no bearing and absolutely no authority in the field that I am in. Absolutely none. So when you say there cannot be any non-natural causes for any events on this planet, you are actually outside of your authority and outside of your territory. You're making statements that can be proven in your own field. So you're making a fool of yourself. So when I say no supernatural causes for any natural phenomenon is possible, I'm actually saying something that is beyond, that is not scientific at all. I cannot prove that scientifically. Right? So it is therefore a philosophical presupposition, not a scientific finding. So I'm presupposing that miracles are not possible and proving that they are not possible, which is a huge statement. So Plantinga, which is one of my favorite philosophers of the moment, says something about that. His Macquarie perhaps means to suggest that the very practice of science requires that one reject the idea of God raising someone from the dead. For you, Mr. Macquarie, you have to think that science is possible only if you reject any outside causes, right? This argument is like the drunk. I like this explanation. Listen to this. This argument is like the drunk who insisted on looking for his lost car keys only under the streetlight on the grounds that the light was better there, right? In fact, it would go the drunk one better. It would insist that because the keys would be hard to find in the dark, they must be under the light. So think about the idea. The scientist who says, I don't know if you've been in the street. In my street, I have lights, and not regularly enough where we don't have dark spots. So you have a light, and then maybe 50 yards later you have another one, and you have maybe 25 yards in between where it's really dark. So assuming that I lost my keys on the way, and I'm going back home, saying, where are my keys? Would it be logical for me to look only under the light? Well, it makes sense because I can see. So therefore, the keys have to be under the light, right? So I'm going over there. I'm not looking over here because it's dark. I'm going to go to the light over there. I'm looking over the other. There's no keys under the light. What is my conclusion? Keys don't exist. My keys don't exist. They just don't exist. Because every time I'm looking under the light, so that's the point he's making. It's the same idea. Like if you're drunk, this is how you're going to think. But if you're a scientist and reject supernatural causes, you're doing the same. I'm looking at the science, I don't see any explanation. And I go like this. I'm going to go over there, another field of science. Sorry. No, there's no explanation. There's no God. I'm sorry, thank you. This is completely impossible to think this way because you're making an assumption, first, that you're drunk, but also that you're blind to reality. You can only find the keys because it's convenient. It's more convenient to look with the light, right? So for him, it's more convenient to look at the world with the science. But there's part of the world that cannot be understood by science, which is not under the light. Therefore, you have to look for other ways to know the world. I think it's a brilliant explanation. I want to finish that paragraph, then we'll stop. The other hidden premise in the statement, miracles cannot happen, is there cannot be a God who does miracles. That's really the bottom line of the issue between faith and science. That the issue is not that science are not that miracles are not possible. The issue really is that there cannot be any God. But that is also a philosophical statement. It's not a scientific statement. So you see, when we look at this, and what have we said about faith and science? We argued last week, very simply, that faith and science are in conflict when faith becomes something else and science becomes something else. All right? But now we're arguing why we don't believe faith and science are in conflict. Number one, because science has to presuppose religious axioms to make any sense. It has to agree that there are some things that have to be true that cannot be proven by science. Right? Some of them are the world can be understood, our minds are reliable, etc. And then we went a little further by saying two other things. Is that not only science was made possible by presupposition, but it was made possible in a Christian environment because that's what made science possible at the beginning. So there's no dark age where people think there was no science at the back. Intelligent people developed the thing we enjoy today. If you went to university, thank a Jesuit. Okay? And the other thing also we said is the heart of the issue. One of them is miracles. But the assumption that is made by scientists is that that's why faith and science cannot be reconciled, because faith insists on miracles being possible, and we know better that miracles are not possible. And we argued against that by saying if you think this way, you're arguing outside of your field of competence, because this is not your field of expertise at all. Right? So that would be one way to argue. And I know it's larger than that. There's many things if you want to go deeper into this, you have to go deeper. But that's the idea of why we believe that faith and science are not in conflict, and why we have to understand this so we can help people who use science against God, showing them that they cannot do that. Okay? Do we have any questions before we finish? It's almost 10. Yes, sir. Well, yes, there's many good books, but there is one author that you can look at. His name is John Lennox. And I'm going to put two names out there, and I think you would enjoy both of them. John Lennox and Alistair McGrath. The two British scientists, they're both Christians, they're both apologists, and they are both very brilliant. They're both scientists. John Lennox is a mathematician, University of Cambridge, and Alistair McGrath has a PhD he has three, I think. One in theology, one in philosophy, and one in biology. And they are both, I think Alistair McGrath is now a professor at King's College in England. So anything they have on the topic are very interesting. YouTube videos and all kinds of books and stuff like that. Yes, sir?
If faith, science, and material fail to find an answer, what's going to be the conclusion?
I'm not sure. Can you repeat that?
The next picture before that.
Yes. This one?
No. Yes, material.
This one?
Yes, the box below. If they fail to find the answer, what's going to be the...
Oh, the faith. Instead of, okay, you got you. Well, the idea is that what we're saying is that faith has something to say about this world. Like, for example, like science can understand the process of death biologically, but we have something to say about spiritually. Why is there death in the universe? And the Bible says because of sin. So faith has something to say about this material world because God revealed it to us. So faith has an authority. So what faith shouldn't be saying is whether or not this treatment is better for tuberculosis than this one. There's nothing in there like I have no authority. Like for example, we give the example of medical treatments or vaccines, all things. There's absolutely no thing that allows me as a Christian to have any authority on those fields at all. I can do my own research, I can ask people questions, but then faith cannot have any word. What faith can say is that you can and have to trust God also when you're being sick. Not just go to, do you pray for your health versus just relying on medicine, for example. But then I cannot reject medicine on the basis of saying, well, I'm going to trust God in this one. Science has something to say on that as well. Okay? So it's 10 o'clock. We have to stop. So remember, next week we have a video of the first hour, and the next hour, Jesse and I will animate a debate. That's going to be so much fun. All right, good night.